We're reaching today's last lecture. Thank you so much, all of you, for staying here with us. There will also be the opening of the Jahresgaben after, but first it's my great pleasure to introduce Charles Teyssou and Pierre-Alexandre Mateos, who were responsible for the Art Basel Paris Conversation Series, Paris Orbital, a public program at the Pinot Collection Bourse de Commerce on Parisian mythologies. They're the artistic directors of Stavanger Secession and are currently working on Cruising Pavilion, Architecture, Dissident Sex and Cruising Cultures, a publication on homosexual cruising published by Head Geneva and Spectre Books Leipzig. Today they will be talking about Das Gold der Liebe II, or II, depending on what language we're in, which is an exhibition conceived as a pornology. It's the exhibition that you're sitting in now. A study of desire, power, and decay. It fantasizes about empires in decline and wounded bodies. The positions it exposes are contradictory, yet all search for a libidinal horizon in the East. Exploitation films, romance novels, conversations between disciples and mentors, sordid tabloids, pornographic genre scenes, intimate and fragmented photographs, and philosophical writings on torture all revolve around a sacred trinity: desire, power, and value. Within this disjunctive theater and perverse cabinet, bodies become living money, worth for any body. The representations of desire are treated as revelations, as histories, economies, and geographies in themselves. Das Gold der Liebe II is a room of obsessional images where the sexual act functions as a founding narrative. Pierre-Alexandre Mateos and Charles Teyssou stage a conversation around domination and submission, exploring how different forms of alterity shape the political value of bodies here in this space. Thank you very much, and welcome to the Kunstverein once again.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you, Milan. Extremely grateful for the invitation and to have the opportunity to make this exhibition at the Kunstverein. Our work with Charles is often at the intersection of bodies and politics, erotic and politics. As he said, we published a book about cruising culture, so homosexual cruising culture, with Spectre Books that will be published by in January. I will start my lecture explaining what is pornology and what was our method of working. So pornology as a method. Thank you for being here, by the way. Today, I'd like to propose a journey through what I call pornology. Not pornography as an image or a jar, but pornography as a method, as a lens, as a way of reading the tension between desire, power, and representation across the last 150 years of Western culture. Let me begin by clarifying this shift. Pornology is not about pornographic content, it is about the words that produce it. In the spirit of porn studies and thinkers like Florent Voros, Linda Williams, or Susan Passonen, Das Gold der Liebe approached pro-bodies, desire, and subjectivities. Pornography is a social apparatus in which power, gender norm, racialization, labor, and digital infrastructure intersect. To work with pornography is to work with the deepest sediment of the social. The exhibition begins from a simple conviction: pornography is a laboratory, a place where the tension between discipline and dissolution, visibility and disappearance, pain and desire are made visible. So let me go back to the definition of pornology. It was used by Deleuze so maybe you have the image. So for Deleuze, in Coldness and Cruelty, pornography becomes a conceptual engine. His analysis of Sacher-Masoch gives us a matrix of what we call pornology, a thinking machine in which erotist practices illuminate the structures that govern law, pleasure, norm, and lack. Leopold Sacher-Masoch, I'm sure you're familiar, but was a 19th century Viennese writer whose literary imaginary was grounded in model of sovereign, domineering women equipped with whip. In 1880, the psychiatric Richard von Krafft-Ebing coined the word masochism to designate what he considered as a pathology. He considered a pathology, a term that will be largely forgotten until Deleuze until Deleuze revived in the late 60s this word. Masochism for Deleuze is not the counterpart of sadism. For Deleuze, sadism is a systematic, slow-driven exercise of cruelty that operates through universal legislation rather than personal passion, which is contrary to the masochistic individual impulse. Not its symmetrical other. It's a distinct philosophical category, a technology of desire that produces its own contract, its own temporality, its own law. In that sense, pornology is a projection of pornography into philosophy, a way of treating erotic practices as theoretical tools. So maybe let's make first a difference between two visions of pornology between Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze. In the history of Michel Foucault, there are a contrast and another definition of pornology. For Foucault, the couple desire-pleasure belongs to the history of power. Desire is not an inner essence, but a historical construction produced by dispositif, and pleasure to become a technique of government, a way of organizing body and regulating conduct. Deleuze overturned this perspective entirely. For him, desire precedes the machinery of power. The lack of lack exists only when desire is already present. For Foucault, desire is not a void, not a want, not a Freudian anger. Desire is a positive, creative, generative force, anti-Hegelian, anti-Freudian. In this framework, desire is not oriented toward pleasure. Pleasure is not the fulfillment of desire, and pleasure is a betrayal of desire, its interruption. Masochism thus becomes a discipline of desire, an asceticism, a practice that withholds pleasure to preserve the full intensity of the desirous state. Let me make an extension after this, a comparison between Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze with Mehdi Belhaj-Kassem, who is famous to have made this book after Badiou in France, if you're familiar. I don't know if it was translated in German, to be honest. But so, French philosopher Mehdi Belhaj-Kassem extends this Deleuzian frame into a post-pornography condition, and I think the show talked more about post-pornography condition. For MBK or Mehdi Belhaj-Kassem, modern pornography is a technology of extinguished desire. It produces a regime in which everything is already visible, consumable, dischargeable, a world without delay, without opacity, without duration. Pornography saturates the field of image. That's a statement, but everyone knows how pornography is present and omnipresent right now, until transgression becomes infertile, recycled endlessly as a cliche. So the political slogan, make love, not war, become kind of naive. You can make love and war. That's what said Deleuze, that's what said Foucault, that's what said MBK. Sexuality is, of course, a conflictual terrain, never a pacified one. And after the sexual liberation, MBK argues, we enter an age of sexual expressionism or depressionism. Too much enjoyment, too much transparency, too much exhibition. Desire collapses under its own excess. Unlimited jouissance becomes depressive. Pornology then is not simply a theory of desire, it's a critique of its extension, and it's where our journey begins with Charles.
So now I'm gonna present 4 pornographical manifesto or 4 vision of the world and its organization through the lens of the desire. So the 4 cases are Daniel Paul Schreber, the early mechanical imagination of Alfred Jarry in The Super Male, Shozonuma Yapu, The Human Cattle, and Pierre Klosowski, Living Money. Let us travel now to Vienna, around 1900, the ideal birthplace of pornology. If pornography is a technology of desire, then Vienna is its Baroque archive, a city where the empire is collapsing, modernity is mutating, hysteria is blossoming, and sexuality becomes a philosophical lens long before Freud gave it a name. Between 1880 and 1918, Central Europe lives on a fault line. On one side, Prussia, which is about discipline, militarism, Protestantism, bureaucratic clarity. On the other, Vienna, which is about ornament, decadence, eroticism, introspection, and dissolution. This tension is not just historical, it's psychical, It's the architecture of modernism, the body controlled versus the body exposed, state order vs private delirium. The first case that we got interested about was Daniel Paul Schreber. So Daniel Paul Schreber, High Magistrate of the German Empire, is the perfect tragic figure of this opposition between Prussia and the Viennese libido. Trained in the strictest Prussian rationality by his father, Maurice Schreber, is shaped by what was called by his father Schwarze Pädagogik, or translated in English, black or poisonous pedagogy. A system grounded in manipulation and violence, including extreme forms of corporal punishment. As Schreber grows older, this armor cracks, this armor being his body. He slowly collapses into an erotic cosmic delirium. So here the two images that you see on the left is the tools of his father that he conceived in order to educate both the mind and the body of his son. And on the right is one of an illustration of what could be the cosmic delirium of Daniel Paul Schreber. That he spoke in his memoir of my nervous illness, in which he described divine rays penetrating and manipulating his body, an enforced feminization transforming his nerves so he may become the bride of God, and a vast celestial apparatus that persecutes and monitors him. The book becomes the gothic underside of imperial masculinity. Freud reads it as a foundational case of psychosis, and queer theory later reads it as a negative desire, dissolving normative subjectivity. Schreber stands between two worlds, Prussia, hierarchy, order, father, authority, and Vienna, hysteria, sexuality, fragmentation. So the second pornographical manifesto has been conceived by Alfred Jarry, so a proto-surrealist, in the Surmail in 1902.
So you have a showcase in the exhibition showing Alfred Jarry.
So Jarry in the Surmail is one of the earliest and strangest pornographical fiction of modernity. It is essentially the story of a man, André Marqueuil, whose sexual and physical performance far exceeds the limits of the human body. Jarry frames this excess not as heroism, but as a pathology, an industrial delirium applied to flesh. I mean, in a previous intervention, someone spoke about Bonnie Blue, 1,000 men exploit. I mean, that could be a kind of proto-version of that. The novels follow two parallel experiments. First, a 10,000 miles race between a train, a team of cyclists fueled by the perpetual motion food, a pseudo-scientific stimulant designed to cheat nature. And second, Marqueuil submit himself to a sexual marathon with 5 women lasting for days, purely to prove a quantitative point that virility is a matter of mechanic, not desire. So here we have like a representation that was published by the son of Michel Carouge, who published a Bachelor Machine, where we see André Marqueuil in the big machine, and then the 5 guys running behind him, and the train.
Maybe you can precise, like Michel Carouge was exhibited by Harald Zeeman at the Documenta 5, and that was part of like one of the, and in the Bachelor Machine in 76 at the Musée d'Art Moderne. So that was the really important artist for Harald Zeeman.
The result of the book of these 2 experiments is not triumph, but collapse. The super male becomes a biological automaton, a body reduced to the logic of acceleration, competition, and machinic efficiency. His death by sexual exhaustion is presented as the logical conclusion of a civilization that treats desire like industry and the body like a factory. As a French academic, Annie Lebrun observes, Jarry is not celebrating excess. He's diagnosing a world governed by machismo, power, and repetition, a world in which masculinity has merged with the very force that depleted it. In Surmail, the sexual machine is the mirror of industrial society. Endless output, mechanical rhythm, the erasure of limit, the sacrifice of pleasure to performance. Jarry transformed desire into an assembly line, a prophecy of the Fordist, hyperproductive, exhausted masculinity that would dominate the 20th century. The third and weirdest pornographical
just to make a commentary, we love to see Alfred Jarry as like a proto chemsex like version of the beginning of the 20th century.
So the third, like, pornographical vision of the world is by Shozonuma. So he's kind of a mysterious writer because nobody knows really who he is. But so he wrote Yapu Human Cattle that you see representation here, like in the 60s, as a kind of series of novels that were published in Kitan Club, like a BDSM magazine in Japan. So Shozonuma, Yapu Human Cattle is one of the most radical pornological fiction of the post-war period. The novel imagines a matriarchal empire ruled by a white Western woman, a world in which gender and race form a rigid political technology. All men are classified according to a strict racial hierarchy. Japanese men occupy the lowest caste, reduced to the status of human cattle. Their bodies are modified, trained, and eroticized to serve any unimaginable function: sexual, domestic, mechanical, and even architectural. In this drawing, for example, one of the body of the Japanese men, I mean, it's not considered a man, but an object becomes a toilet, are trained to become a toilet. The novel functions as a pornological diagram. Desire becomes a hierarchy, power becomes ornament, bodies become infrastructure. It stages domination, not as brutality, but as a protocol, aesthetic, and system. Yukio Mishima considered Yapu the most important geopolitical fiction of the 20th century. For him, the novel translated Japan's traumatic post-war submission into a science fiction sadomasochistic allegory. The humiliation of defeat becomes a vast erotic machine. National identity is retracted through servitude, modification, and fetishized hierarchy. What makes Yapu so unsettling is its cold precision. Numa writes with clinical, almost bureaucratic detachment, as if documenting a perfectly rational system. The distance intensifies the horror. Dominations become normalized, elegant, and efficient. In the exhibition, this graphic coldness becomes crucial. Numa offers a model for understanding how political domination can mutate into aesthetic form, how violence becomes design, and how the body becomes a medium for ideology. Yapu establishes the conceptual thread that runs through everything that follows: the transformation of flesh into function and of desire into technology of control. And then the last pornographical vision manifesto is by Pierre Klosowski, Living Money, which is a quite abstract vision. For Klosowski, our industrial age is built upon a disciplinary dispositive, a system that regulates body, channels impulse, and molds subjects into units of productivity. As in the Schreber case, civilization forged a cuirass, a psychic and somatic armor that immobilizes, drives, and renders the individual compatible with industrial order. This cuirass produces a new kind of body, a body whose force are hierarchized, contained, and made exchangeable. An organism optimized for efficiency rather than voluptuousness, for repetition rather than intensity. Within this framework, Klosowski introduced the notion of argent vivant, living money. Living money designates the moment where libidinal forces themselves acquire a mercantile character. Desire becomes speculation, excitation becomes surplus, bodies circulate as fluctuating values in a vast erotic market. Passion is no longer intimate, it is indexed, quantified, and exchanged. The erotic impulse enters the sphere of general economy. Desires becomes a volatile asset whose movement resembles financial turbulence. There is no currency except the convulsion, overflow, and unpredictable circulation of desire. Libido becomes liquidity, value becomes vibration. In this sense, Klosowski reframed desire as an unstable currency, a force whose fluctuation reveals the hidden fractures of our civilization, the point where discipline, commerce, and flesh converge and begin to collapse into one another. In his vision, the modern subject is suspended between two incompatible imperatives: to remain disciplined enough to function and volatile enough to desire, a tension that redefines the libidinal economy of our age.
So, Robert, that's a painting of Pierre Klosowski we have in the exhibition. You know, probably like Pierre Klosowski was a brother of Balthus, but was also a theoretician. economical theoretician, but also in anthropology. But who was Robert? Robert was his wife. And in the exhibition we have a painting from '67 depicting his wife Robert, the central figure of Pierre Klossowski's trilogy, The Revocation of Edict de Nantes, Robert ce soir, and Le Souffleur. Robert is inspired by his wife, Denise Morin-Sinclair. He had become far more than a character. For Klossowski, she is a theoretical construct, a living allegory of the simulacrum through which he staged desire, ritual, and transgression. Why? Because in Robert ce soir, Klossowski staged one of the most provocative philosophical fiction. The husband who loans his wife to other men, not to abandon possession, but to intensify it. As he writes, one never gives what is unexchangeable, one only lends it to possess all the more what one has. I don't know if I was enough clear, but for Klossowski, this ritualized adultery is not libertinage, but a religious inversion of marriage, an act where transgression reinforces the sacred bond it appeared to betray. Robert remains an unexchangeable good whose value is heightened by her consent to a lover chosen by her husband. The painting reflects this logic. Robert is explored, offered, staged, not as an object of voyeurism, but again as a theoretical figure. Through her, Klossowski explored desire as a destabilizing force where sacred and profane, possession and relinquishment, eroticism and law blur into a single and disquieting tableau. Let's now move to post-Cold War masculinities and pornographic economies. One of the central pieces of the exhibition is William E. Jones' famous piece, pretty famous piece. After '89, pornography entered a new territory, the post-communist body. So William E. Jones, The Fall of Communism, as seen as Gay Pornography from '98. In The Fall of Communism, as seen as Gay Pornography, William E. Jones chastely reassembled gay pornographic movie, consumed by Western audience and performed by actors from the former Soviet bloc. This film is questionable. The empty looks, the uncomfortable gesture during the sexual intercourse, the raw lights, the setting of an empire in agony participate in the original film as more of staging than a real necessity. Jones cites two moments of the 20th century, when white body are particularly used in Europe as part of sexual market. One after the First World War in the bloodless Germany, the other after the fall of Berlin Wall in the country of Central and Eastern Europe. The body actor are thus seen as a machine of emotion and stimulant of a libidinal economy, absorbing the surplus of industrial society with camouflage impulse. But to understand really well the piece of William E. Jones, we need to come back to another pornographer who is French and who is called Jean-Noël René Clair, Ginny RC. So maybe you can move to Ginny RC. Yeah, that's a good picture. So Jean-Noël René Clair occupies a singular place in European gay pornography, not as a mere producer of erotic imagery, but as an architect of fantasies shaped by the post-Cold War landscape and the afterlife of military masculinity. Born in Tübingen in 1953 to a military father, he worked at the margin of Europe. Nightclub in Luxembourg and in Eastern France, the barrack-like atmosphere of mess. Crafting films that feature, above all performers from the former Eastern Bloc. Between 1995 and 2010, René Clair built a visual world of legionnaire, footballer, North African men, and especially ex-Soviet recruits, staging masculinity at the intersection of discipline, secrecy, and geopolitical tension. His dramatic arrest in Bulgaria after his 80s movies, officially on pimping charge, he was accused to pimp, widely interpreted as an antagonist with local homophobia, marks the volatility of the very system he navigates. Of course, we can make a lecture of Ginny RC through Orientalism, or Joseph Mossad, for example, desiring Arab, so a decolonial perspective on this. However, this universe also reveals how European gay pornography mobilized colonial and post-communist fantasy. The bodies René Leclerc sought, racialized migrant, Balkan youth, former circumscripts, became erotic props within a hierarchy of desire shaped by Europe imperial memory. Rather than legitimating or condemning this perspective, situate his work within the pornological economy of the exhibition examined. This is a troubling archive where desire, domination, and the erotization of the other converge. Then we're going to talk about Nguyen Tan Oang, A View from the Bottom. That's also a video we show at Cruising Pavilion in New York at Lulo 38 a few years ago. Nguyen Tan Oang will provide a crucial counterpoint. As a video artist and scholar, he analyzed how early gay pornography constructs racial consciousness through the codification of sexual role. His research focused on the persistent alignment of Asian male bodies with passivity, bottoming, softness, and docility, figure of affective submission that mirror broader Orientalist fantasy. In contrast, the white American male body is framed as active, virile, and dominant, embodying a sexual extension of geopolitical power. Placing alongside Jones, William E. Jones, Nguyen revealed how pornography became a minor archive of global hierarchies. Where Jones identifies the erotization of ideological symbol at a moment of political rupture, Nguyen exposed the racialized grammar of desire that underpin American cultural hegemony. Both demonstrate how pornography, far from being a marginal form, operates as a coded theater in which geopolitical myths, inequalities, and fantasy are rehearsed and naturalized through the body. In this exhibition, you have a video that evokes an elusive anti-Vietnam War porn film from '93. A work very instably and mismembered, half lost or confused with the infamous exploitation film Forced Entry. Actually, no one knows if it's a real movie or not. Whether or not the movie exists as described, the spectral present points to the contradiction of this era as the height of American imperial violence in Vietnam. Pornography became another site where the war trauma, racial fantasy, and masculinity aggression were recycled into erotic imagery. The ambiguity is itself productive. It reminds us how queer history survives through fragment, misalignment, and contested memories, and how even pornographic detritus can index the geopolitical violence that shapes the bodies and desire of the time. Let's move now to one of my favorite work of the exhibition, which is Victor Grodecki, also a problematic work for many reasons. So Victor Grodecki realized in '96, in the year following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet bloc, thousands of German and Austrian crossed the border to enjoy the juvenile body in the city of Prague. The boy was said to be more open and possessed, according to an Orientalist stereotype, a more fluid sexuality. The Polish director Victor Grodecki, documentary Nobody Without Soul, interviewed young minors about their passage into prostitution and then the pornographic industry. In this exercise, ultimately manipulative, Grodecki overlays Mahler and Vivaldi, Schubert, zoom on a weeping face and anesthetize misery through a grunge romanticism reminiscent of Christian F. This anti-Bildungsroman, where the moral condemnation of sexual acts is never far away, remain riddled with unresolved tension between soft porn, voyeurism, malaise, and tragedy. Are this boy victim of clients, filmmaker? Or this boy victim of client, filmmaker, and spectator? Or the capitalist entrepreneurs I sometimes claim to be? Nobody Without Soul forms a part of a Grodecki troubling Prague trilogy, followed by No Angel But Angel from '94 and Mandragora from '97, a body of works that raise moral question it cannot and perhaps will not be resolved. Let's talk now about Bjarne Melgaard, more like famous like Norwegian artist, where we have like two paintings and this sculpture of the ape with an erection. So what is interesting, I think, with Bjarne Melgaard is this links with queer negativity. As you can see in the show, we're not like into queer positivism at all. So Bjarne Melgaard radicalized queer negativity by turning desire into a theater of depletion, excess, and self-undoing. In his installation and drawing, queer identity is staged not as pride of affirmation, but as combustion. Bodies dissolving into substance, dependency, and violent coit. This aligns closely with Lee Edelman's critique is no future. where queerness refuses the social fantasy of futurity, reproduction, and continuity. Male guard figures do not project themselves into a better tomorrow. They inhabit the volatile present of pure drive, where the death drive becomes both a politic and an aesthetic. The destructiveness is not a pathology, but resistance to the heteronormative demand to the productive coherent of survivable. At the same time, Miergaard resonates with Tim Dean, another porn studies teacher, who worked about Barback, concept of radical hospitality. The willingness to receive the other, including the viral, the toxic, the dangerous, we talk of course of HIV, without boundaries. Dean reframed queer sex as an ethic of exposure, a permeability of the bodies that challenge eliminatory logic. Miergaard visualized this porousness through wounded theater, zone where bodies open themselves to harm, influence, contamination, and contacts. His universe echoes Genet, for example, ecstatic criminality, Fassbinder, erotic cruelty, or Bersani, Leo Bersani, Rectum is a Grave, notion of self-shattering, in which the subject seeks out his own dissolution. Miergaard queer negativity becomes an aesthetic refusal, an aesthetic of surrender in a world demanding coherence. Now we'll talk about networked pornology. So one of the first pieces of the exhibition, and the neon you can see, kill and goes. So it's a bit like a different kind of pornology, more political and more linked to racist, I will not say anecdotes, that would be appropriate, but history. Peter Friedel, Kill and Go, so an Australian artist, turned a public neon sign into a brutal echo of the racist murder of Romani people in Austria, exposing how violence circulates as everyday spectacle. By stripping the message to an imperative, the work reveals a pornographic logic of visibility, where bodies, whether racialized or eroticized or rendered consumable through the cold machinery of public display. Friedel hired a neon sign in Vienna to flash Kill and Go 1 year after this racist murder. This phrase became a pornographical object, violence turned into spectacle, language as a social desire, the city as a medium for aggression. Let's talk now about Paul McCartney. So I don't know if I need to too much introduce Paul McCartney, I guess not. But we have like two sculptures of Paul McCartney, the skunk, which are like the two bears, skunk, yeah. So of course this can be read as a parody of the very machinery that made the United States the cultural superpower of the post-World War II. In Skunk, the fusion of cartoonish mascot with exposed sexuality revealed how American entertainment, from Disney to mass pornography, became an industrial apparatus for manufacturing affect, pleasure, and obedience. The infantilizing aesthetic of animation and the libidinal charge of porn are not opposite in McCarthy's work, but two faces of the same hegemonic system, a soft power empire exporting desire, fantasy, and sanitized violence across the globe. Let's talk now about Shulia Sheng, Taiwanese artist, extremely good, who made the Taiwanese pavilion, not at the last Biennale of Venice, but like I think like 4 years ago, by Paul B. Preciado, sorry. So in 2001, Shulia Sheng, who is lesbian, who lives in Paris, produced IQ. It's a cyber pornographic myth, a film that rewrites desire through the protocol of the digital age. Produced at the turn of the millennium, IQ imagines a corporate program seeking to upload, standardize, and circulate orgasm as a transferable data unit, an erotic commodity engineered for infinite replication. So the story of the movie is not that simple. It's a seductive machine called Reiko, who collects the maximum amount of data on the sexual act. When this transformation is lost due to a virus, Reiko is reset by a retired programmer and then sent back into cyberspace to recover it. This mutant figure, endowed with vast expertise, set viewer are tracing in a dazzling digital and pornographic vertigo. Basically, she starts to kill all her customers in the movie. That's the movie you can see at the beginning of the exhibition. Now let's talk about Anna Maria Benova painting. She's a young artist, probably the younger of the exhibition. In 2022, it was during a painting workshop in the Czech Republic that the painter Anna Maria Benova from Bratislava began this series of paintings with gloomy eroticism after her teachers asked her if she came from a bigoted family. Accustomed to depict genre scene from the pornographic industry, Anna Maria Benova illustrates with this series a porn king of family affair or simulated incest. Marked by a form of grotesque, her canvases with lacustrine of mustard yellow hue seems to expose a universe on a roses and cursed image. Sometimes a ghostly figure disappears in the glaze. Elsewhere, the smile is frozen as a masturbatory introduction scene that is too long. In another painting, the actor become body cases or body furniture a la Alan Jones. Her grating and high offensive painting are as much sick pastiche as pale simulacra of a culture in which the pornographic is omnipotent. So let's talk about like the last video, and after I think we'll have made like a complete tour of the exhibition. From Tonya Nika McLauden, The Labyrinth. That's a video from 2024. Tonya Nika McLauden is a Philadelphia-based artist and filmmaker whose work explored Black queer lives through archive, ritual, and embodied body. Moving between film installation and research, she creates emotionally charged structure with desire, memory, and disappearance, shaping new form of Black queer storytelling. In this movie, The Labyrinth, she constructs a sensuous, historically layered reflection on cruising, surveillance, and Black queer desire. Working with a 16.5mm surveillance footage, 17 tea-room porn, a structuralist film shot in North Philadelphia, McLauden built a fragmented geography where desire is always coded, hidden, and transmitted through gesture, and a conceptual frame from non-linear queer time. Our montage refuses narrative continuity, instead privileging touch, shadow, breath, and the politic of looking. In McLauden hands, The Labyrinth is not simply a site of erotic encounter, but an archive of survival, when marginal image, tea room, bathroom, alleyway, form an alternative history of Black queer life, invisible to mainstream documentary tradition. She makes a clear references to the poet Brad Johnson in this video. Brad Johnson was a poet of the cruising nights. So Brad Johnson is born in '60, died in 2011 from AIDS, whose poem The Labyrinth and called McLauden film. He's a foundational yet understudied voice of Black queer theory in the 80s and 90s. His work, published notably in '95 anthology Milking Black Bull, explored cruising as a choreography of coded desire, again, anonymity, hunger, and fleeting communion. Johnson writes the sexual labyrinth as both as a physical space and an emotional topology shaped by fear, pleasure, and the threats of disappearance. Much like our writer like Essex Hemphill and Samuel R. Delany, Johnson examined how Black queer men navigate erotic spaces marked by surveillance, racism, and risk, transforming marginal acts into sites of intimidating knowledge. His poetry emphasis on gesture, echo, and shadow resonate deeply with McLauden's structural aesthetic. Both artists reclaim the ephemeral, the unrecorded, and the illicit as form of Black queer memory. I will end with a provocation, but I think it's important. I wanted to talk about Jean Genet and especially about like funeral rites, a book that Germans should know. So Genet understood better than anyone that desire is not innocent. Desire is political, violent, tragic, and beautiful. In Pompe Funèbre, Funeral Rites from 1948, Genet staged a love story between a Frenchman and a Nazi soldier, a tale of desire and betrayal across enemy lines. Written in the aftermath of World War II, the book became an erotic elegy for Genet lovers, Jean de Carnin, killed by the Germans, transforming political violence into a dark meditation of love, mourning, and forbidden intimacy. He writes, and I will finish with that. The Führer sent his most beautiful men to their deaths. It was the only way he could possess them all. For how many times have I wished to kill those handsome boys who annoyed me, since I didn't have enough cock to fuck them at all once, not enough semen to fill them. One shot from a revolver I feel would have brought calm back to my heart and body, both troubled by desire and jealousy. More beautiful than the pyre of flame, fabric, and paper created by Riton, Germany itself was a blazing pyre In disorder, without regularity, the flames, the amber, the burning brands lived out their life and death, beating here and then and threatening Hitler. A very slight shift is enough. Stripping word of their irony, from humor to reveal to us the tragedy and beauty of a fact or a soul. The poet is tented by play. Before the war, humorists caricatured Adolf Hitler as a buffoonish maid of Orleans, with the mustache of a cinema clown. He heard voices, said the caption. Did the humorist sense that Hitler was Joan of Arc? Yeah, that's... Pornology, as we try to describe it, is not so a study of pornography. It's just a study of desire under pressure, desire of power, desire of fracture, desire of collapse, as an archive, as a dark illumination. It's a way to looking at the world without moral anesthesia. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for this in-depth look at your exhibition. I think this would be a great time for a last round of questions. Are there any questions from the audience at this point?
Thank you for this kind of long history of the kind of work that informs your practice and that we have here in this room. I guess my question is about history and whether the value of transgression changes at all from, for instance, like Vienna 1990 to now.
I don't trust about transgression anymore, personally. I think everything has already been made. No, there are certain type of transgression, but real transgression is very forbidden, so I will not touch this kind of subject.
No, I think it's still, I mean, obviously what is transgressive before is like different from now, but when you have like, we show the Numa, the Yapu, the human cattle, I mean, it's still like a highly transgressive reading about whole nation submitting itself after the Second World War. So I think the value of transgression is still prevalent, especially I mean, nowadays in a highly conservative, climate throughout Europe and in the United States. So I think it's more than ever.
You're right. Of course, like in the Trump era and Putin era, like transgression has still a value, I think. And I don't know, like to make the transgression is to make, for example, like a comparison between Ovid metamorphosis and zoophilia. That would be a transgression.
All right. Are there any more questions from the audience at this point?
Yeah, it's not a very deep question, but just because you show there's a work by Klosowski, and I'm wondering why show Robert and not many of these works with
because
boys?
they were not available.
Okay.
Okay, mine is also about a specific work, which is the Victor Grodecki film.
Yeah.
Because I had not seen it before, but I was very touched by it. And I tried to research or find some information, but I couldn't. So, like, is he himself acting in the film?
No, he's not acting, but he's an interviewer. And that's why I talked about like his manipulative position also. We don't, like all these kids are see entrepreneurs themselves as a prostitute, but we don't know who manipulate who. I think in the movie, that's what creates this malaise. Victor Grodecki is a teacher still in Poland, but it's impossible to talk with him. That's like 3 years I tried to contact him. So yeah, it's hard to find information about Grodecki, yeah.
But the filmmaker and the mortician, is this a fictional character?
No, they are not fictional. It's
they
a documentary.
All real.
They're all prostitutes
okay.
and all working in the pornographic industry, and they're all minor.
Because
minor.
somehow the voice of the documentary filmmaker and the filmmaker in the film blend.
Yeah, totally. You have like a fictional part in the way you use like classical music to emphasize and to make the work more tragic. It's almost like a, I don't know, again, it creates a sort of malaise to use Vivaldi and Mahler and Schubert, like with this like testimony of your young prostitute. But you're right, it's between documentary and fiction at this point, because he used like ornamental, or let's say like accessories of montage or music.
Yeah, it's almost as if they become the same.
Yeah,
Like
right.
the inquiry is the same somehow. Yeah. But then I was also wondering about, well, or I don't know, maybe it's more of an observation, because the filmmaker, like the filmmaker who is also a mortician, which almost feels like fictional. I mean, this is such a trope or cliche, or comparing a filmmaker to someone who slices up a body, for instance, and then this filmmaker as a sort of well, you spoke earlier about like the limits of the body, and this filmmaker is desiring these young men.
He's definitely desiring these young men, yeah.
Yes,
I think so.
but and in a kind of omnipotent way, that he can have it all in a way, and he speaks also. He says things that like, we just want to have fun without any limits. But it's interesting because I was talking to Billy about this also, that.
But he doesn't show any sexual intercourse.
No, he doesn't. But he is also very concerned with them being gay, which they are not all, you know.
Yeah, it's already gay for pay, absolutely.
Which is that where he stops becoming the desiring subject and becomes the object himself. And that's kind of the interesting part of that film.
But I think that's what is interesting. They are completely objectified, and that's why it resonates so much with other objectification of bodies in many works of the exhibition.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that was all.
Maybe there's a conversation there for afterwards as well. Are there any last questions? The last question of the day, maybe?
You borrowed the title of your exhibition, and I think now through this talk I had the feeling that the body is not only serving a system, but it's also changing the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Always transactional, but changing the system.
Right, and in this form of like body value, currency, and politicalness, I was wondering, what was the body in communism then?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't understand.
What's the body in communism?
Yeah, what's the body in communism for you now in this,
I don't know. I think the body
accumulation?
was still transactional, maybe not like in the theory of Pierre-Alexandre living money.
I mean, it's interesting because we mostly speak about the body after communism, or the body fantasized as a communist body by the West. Because, for example, William Mead Jones' movie is very much about this idea that not only the American power wanted to have like to win ideologically and materially with the Soviet Union, but they wanted to absorb the communist body into some kind of fetish. So they didn't care so much about the communist body in itself, but they cared, transforming it into an object of desire. That's why also it's like completely ridiculous because, for example, you have like a sequence where you have this kind of gay for pay escort filmed having, a sexual relationship with a Gorbachev portrait behind him, or they are dressed as a Soviet military. So it's like a communist as a kind of a costume.
The folklore, yeah.
It's not really a question. It's like more like a comment from a person with a post-Soviet background. So, if speaking about body in communism, I think in the early age of the Soviet communism, it was the body. There was a fantasy of the body that overcomes its limits, like a heroic body that even there was an attempt to overcome the body itself. So maybe it explains something. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, you were speaking about the Stakhanov's body, the kind of body machine. But that I don't know, but maybe there is a kind of sexual counterpart of, this guy that is able to work hundreds of hours a week and then to be able to perform sexually as well. But Alfred Jarry is, some kind of translation of that.
I think there's also one work missing in your presentation. There's a work in this show about the Olympic body, or the kind of
you're
Olympic.
right. Nicolas Georgiev. Nicolas Georgiev, so let me find me in my notes. So Nicolas Georgiev talked about Bulgaria. I will try to be short. You know, Bulgaria, after the fall of Berlin Wall, was obsessed by Olympic Games. It was a way to have soft power, and sport became an obsession. That's why you have all like this like trend of body on steroids and all this, often like body on steroids working for politics. So you have this mix of corruption and bodies on steroids. And he aestheticized this stuff like typically from the 90s in Bulgaria, who was like so obsessed to participate to Olympic Games. And he made a series of magazine and an EP, a noise music album about this Bulgarian past, and yeah, this kind of vintage steroid turbo folk aesthetic.
And so I think there is a history in which there's a kind of literal transmission of something that's possible in the 70s and 80s that continues into a new kind of international capitalist system, ways of moving through the Olympics in this case internationally, but of course also the way in which Olympic sports sort of define and cultivate a certain type of body image that continues even after the Soviet Union has fallen. I think on this note, we are going to end the symposium. My thanks goes out to everyone who helped make this possible. Charles, Pierre, thank you so much for this really in-depth look at your exhibition. Thank you to all of today's speakers. Thank you to all the artists who contributed greatly to this exhibition. Thank you to everyone in the team of the Kunstverein and the Behörde für Kultur und Medien Hamburg. And thank you for coming and being here with us, to the audience also. Have a good night.